Imagine a British prince so wild, so charming, and so dangerously reckless that his scandals spanned continents. A man who could be found as easily in Mayfair nightclubs as in the mansions of Singapore, or in the smoky jazz bars of Paris. A royal who seduced heiresses, black jazz singers, aristocratic wives, and, some claim, other men. A prince whose life of excess and intrigue ended in a wartime plane crash so suspicious that even 80 years later, the truth remains buried. Today, we uncover the forgotten royal rebel, Prince George, Duke of Kent, the black sheep of the British royal family, whose story has been meticulously erased from history. Born on December 20th, 1902, at York Cottage, Sandringham, Prince George Edward Alexander Edmund was the fourth son of King George V and Queen Mary. He was fifth in line to the throne, far enough removed from the crown that royal duty didn't weigh as heavily on him as it did on his older brothers. His place in the royal family should have kept him grounded, yet George instead found freedom in it, and he seized it, unburdened by the constraints of tradition and expectation. While his brothers Edward and Albert, later known as King George VI, were moulded for roles in government and leadership, George's path was never quite as clear. He wasn't burdened by the monarchy's heavy expectations, and that freedom led him down a path of pleasure and recklessness. Instead of focusing on royal duties, George found joy in the indulgence of his passions. He became known as the party prince, the epitome of the Jazz Age's glamour and excess. Between the two world wars, while Britain reeled from economic hardship and political unrest, Prince George and his circle of high society friends immersed themselves in a world of drugs, alcohol, and decadent affairs. In an era when royal scandals were usually kept behind closed doors, George was far too reckless to remain hidden. He was the talk of London's elite, living a life that many would envy and many others would scorn. And, oh, the affairs, the sordid, scandalous affairs that would have made even the most daring of Hollywood stars blush. From heiresses to married women, jazz singers to aristocratic rebels, George's lovers were as varied as his adventures. At just 20 years old, while serving as a sub-lieutenant in the Royal Navy, George's reputation as a heartbreaker was already solidified. His naval duties were supposed to keep him disciplined, but his roving eye could not be tamed. His father, King George V, alarmed by his son's behaviour, assigned a naval officer to keep an eye on him. But it was all for naught. George's passions couldn't be contained. One of his first known lovers was Joan Combe, a woman whose heritage as the granddaughter of the Marquess Conyngham added a touch of aristocratic flair to their romance. The couple's relationship was filled with cheeky letters, playful innuendo, and even a humorous incident in which George returned a small relic of underwear Jean had left behind, poking fun at her ability to manage without it. Jean wasn't just another passing infatuation for George. Their relationship marked one of the few times he appeared genuinely smitten. Friends noted how George would send her extravagant bouquets of orchids and handwritten notes dripping with innuendo. There are stories of the pair sneaking away during royal gatherings, slipping out to obscure country inns where their antics became the stuff of legend among the staff. It was during this period that George began to show his talent for evading royal minders and palace staff, perfecting the art of the discreet getaway, a skill that would serve him well in the decades of scandal to follow. But Joan Combe was just the beginning. George's most notorious love affair was with Alice Kiki Preston, an American socialite whose name became synonymous with scandal in high society. Known as the girl with the silver syringe due to her addiction to cocaine and morphine, Kiki introduced George to a world of drugs that would forever tarnish his reputation. Their relationship was a public spectacle, but George, ever the rebel, didn't seem to care. When the affair became too well known, it was Edward, Prince of Wales, who used his influence to have Kiki banned from Britain. But George and Kiki simply moved their affair to Paris, continuing to live dangerously as if they were invincible. The affair wasn't just about drugs, though. Through Kiki, George also developed a taste for illicit indulgences that would continue to haunt him. But Kiki wasn't the only scandalous figure in George's life. His dalliances with black jazz singers like Florence Mills and Adelaide Hall were nothing short of shocking for a 1920s Britain steeped in racial prejudices. In fact, it was rumoured that George fathered several illegitimate children, including one boy named Michael Canfield, who would later marry Jackie Kennedy's sister, Caroline Lee Bouvier. Rumours even spread that the celebrated romantic novelist Barbara Cartland's daughter, Rain, was the child of George and Cartland, though this too remains unproven. Rain, as we know, would later become the highly controversial stepmother to Princess Diana, a title that did not endear her to the royal family. The allegations of these hidden children remained a royal secret, never fully confirmed but never entirely dismissed either. Beyond the whispered scandals of illegitimate offspring, George's social circle itself became a reflection of his untamed desires and appetite for the forbidden. He gravitated toward artists, bohemians, and the dispossessed, those considered outsiders by the rigid standards of British high society. His nights were often spent in smoky jazz clubs and private salons where gender norms blurred and decadence reigned. It was in these circles that George felt most alive, far from the suffocating expectations of Buckingham Palace, surrounded by kindred spirits who embraced risk and pleasure as a way of life. But it wasn't just women who captivated George. He also had rumoured liaisons with men, a bold and dangerous pursuit in an era when homosexuality was criminalised. Some say George was even arrested for a homosexual act, but was quietly released when his identity was revealed. There were also reports of a relationship with the famed playwright Noel Coward, though both men denied the rumours. Nonetheless, George's flamboyance and love for cross-dressing, even once dressing as a woman in Danzig, Poland, were widely known. His travels took him to distant lands, but no matter where he went, scandal followed. In 1926, George was sent to Singapore with the Royal Navy in an apparent attempt by his father to distance him from his growing reputation. But even across the globe, George's exploits continued. He seduced Layla Devitt, a beautiful and older wife of a wealthy commodities magnate. Their affair scandalised the British expatriate community in the colony, with George entertaining both Layla and her husband at dinner parties while secretly carrying on his romance. The affair eventually fizzled out, and Layla returned to London, her name forever tarnished in royal circles. Though George's royal duties took him to exotic locales and civil service positions, he was never happy with the conventional life. He remained restless, often unhappy, always chasing the next thrill, whether it was in the form of romance or adventure. One of George's favourite haunts was London's Café de Paris, an infamous nightclub where aristocrats mingled with performers, gangsters, and the nouveau riche. Cloaked in cigarette smoke and the strains of jazz, the club became the epicentre of George's nocturnal escapades. There, He was known to arrive unannounced, champagne in hand, dancing with chorus girls and entertainers, often leaving with more than one companion for the evening. It was in places like these that George's dual identity flourished. A prince by birth, but a rogue by choice. His brother Edward, known for his own notorious affairs, became his closest companion in scandalous pursuits. Together they turned London's social scene upside down, openly courting controversy and flaunting royal expectations. Rumours even swirled that King George V predicted, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself in 12 months." Sadly, it wasn't far from the truth. Eventually, under pressure from the royal family, George married Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark in 1934. Their union appeared glamorous, a marriage that should have put an end to George's rampant affairs. However, even marriage couldn't stop his philandering. His affairs continued with an ever-growing list of aristocrats and socialites. Princess Marina, reportedly a patient and tolerant woman, learned to accept George's infidelities, a harsh reality for many royal wives throughout history. Then came World War II, and with it, a final attempt by George to rehabilitate his image. Though he served as a group captain in the Royal Air Force, his role was largely ceremonial. His passions for life and love seemed to have worn him down, and it was clear that George was no longer the carefree playboy he had once been. On August 25, 1942, Prince George boarded an RAF Sunderland flying boat bound for Iceland. It was a routine mission, but the plane crashed shortly after takeoff, killing 14 of the 15 people on board. The sole survivor, Sergeant Andrew Jack, later claimed to have found George's body in the pilot's seat, a position he should not have occupied. This only fueled rumours that George had been drinking heavily before the flight, and might have been the one piloting the aircraft when it crashed. What made the crash all the more suspicious was the cloak of secrecy that immediately descended upon the incident. Within hours of the wreckage being discovered, military officials cordoned off the area, and any civilians who had witnessed the crash were swiftly silenced. Eyewitness accounts from a nearby village hinted at peculiar details. One fisherman claimed to have seen a man in civilian clothes and what appeared to be rouge on his cheeks being led away from the crash site under heavy guard. Another villager insisted that there were more bodies than the official count acknowledged, only for his statement to be quickly retracted under mysterious circumstances. The Royal Air Force and the government issued a brief, sanitised statement, omitting any mention of an unauthorised passenger or the rumours swirling about George's condition at the time of the crash. Whispers within military circles suggested the prince had argued with the pilot that morning, reportedly insisting on taking the controls for a portion of the flight. To this day, no official flight logs from that mission have been released to the public, and those involved in the investigation were bound by lifelong confidentiality agreements. Adding to the mystery, there were reports of an extra, unidentified passenger on board the flight. Some speculated that it was George's secret lover who had been seen earlier that day at the RAF base, wearing makeup and blending in with the crew. The British government moved quickly to suppress the incident. Official records were sealed, and the inquiry's findings were buried. This silence gave rise to various conspiracy theories. Some believed Winston Churchill himself ordered the crash, fearing George might have been a Nazi sympathiser, though there is no conclusive evidence to support this. Others argue that George's reckless lifestyle, his growing list of personal secrets, and the royal family's need to protect their image may have led to his untimely death. Despite the intrigue surrounding his death, the royal family maintained a stoic silence, and George was laid to rest with little fanfare. His 3 children, Prince Edward, Princess Alexandra and Prince Michael of Kent, have led relatively scandal-free lives. Prince Edward, in particular, has been noted for avoiding the public eye, a stark contrast to his father's wild behaviour. In the years following his death, the royal family continued to remain tight-lipped about George's life and death. No memorial or monument publicly commemorates his life, aside from a stained-glass window in the Savoy Chapel in London, a vague tribute to a man whose secrets were never fully revealed. And so Prince George, Duke of Kent, remains an enigmatic figure in British royal history. A man who lived fast, loved recklessly, and died mysteriously. His story serves as a reminder that even in the most scrutinised families on earth, some secrets refuse to stay buried. If you enjoyed this deep dive into royal scandal, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more untold stories from history. Let us know in the comments which royal scandal you would like me to explore next.